Non-sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
Warning. The following live stream is intended for an uncommon audience. Those suffering from religious celiotitis, idiotic use of the word scientism, or geoplanetary flatardation are advised not to watch any further, as this could result in symptoms including feeling triggered, loss of wokeness, or the need to comment in all caps. However, if you think bold ideas are righteous, unique perspectives are gospel, and strong opinions are sacred, then we say hallelujah. This is Non-Sequitur. Never follow. And now, here are your hosts, Kyle Curtis and Steve McRae.
Or he wants us to talk about how silly that was and how instead of actual stuff.
Oh, that is true, Zod. I believe you're right there. Distraction. You know what? And there's a lot of cases where I think that he's a master at that. Like sometimes I feel like he is an evil genius and he's got us. Oh, well, ladies and gentlemen, I was referring, of course, to Steve. He is the evil genius that I would be referring to. Well, hello, everybody. Let's see if we can start over. I apologize. I didn't hear Dave say that we were live, and I was just rambling on. So we thank you for joining us. We're going to do a discussion that I think is going to be fantastic because usually starting these, you know, we don't like to say that we're biased, but we are a little biased, obviously, when we have religious debates. But so far in this call, he's making it very difficult to dislike our theist person today, and that is going to be James from Modern Day Hysteria. How are you doing, sir?
Doing well. I'm excited to be here. I think this will be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And of course, the handsome man in the other box, sans static face, is the one and only Prophet of Zod. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And if guys, if you haven't, I know that I linked it last week in our community page, but I'll do the same thing underneath or in the description of this video. But check out when yours truly was in a cartoon that, or part of Prophet of Zod's animated series, where I played Cain and I got to actually kill Godless Engineer. It was very, very cathartic. So I appreciate him giving me that opportunity.
a dream come true for many people, right?
Yeah, just you'll never say the words goat fucker ever the same again. Ever the same. But nonetheless, welcome, gentlemen, and we'll get to the discussion here in just a second. Let me run through very quickly some announcements of some things that we've got coming up. Tomorrow we've got Vadim Newquist and Bunty King. They're going to be talking about freedom of speech to start out with. I'm not sure how long it'll stay there, but that's where we will be starting. That's going to be an ideology episode with KC, so join us for that at 8 p.m. Eastern. Thursday is going to be the guys from Three Black Heathens. Actually, we're going to have... Did I get it backwards? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys. I should probably look at my... See, there I go getting confident again.
Yeah, no, Tim O'Neill's on Friday. Unbelieving's Wednesday. And today is Tuesday. And we have Prophet of Zod with us today.
Okay, we're good. We're good now. I've got my notes right here. Okay, so let's switch those around. Tomorrow will be Three Black Heathens. That's going to be Emperor Atheist and Nate Brody. They're going to be coming in to talk about their new show. We just did the Dean Newquist and Bunty King. And then we've got, let's see, Tim O'Neill on Friday. Everybody loves Tim O'Neill. He's going to be back. This time he's going to be talking about the Dark Ages and kind of summing that up for us. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that there's going to be a little part in there about Flat Earth. So I think he's going to work in some lore about what it was like back then in the Flat Earth. Steve, do you think that they did like debates in the taverns?
I'm sure a lot of fights have started over who's the best king. Sure.
I'm talking about Flat Earth back then. You think they jousted over Flat Earth? Like somebody had a flat sphere,
It's always going to be one. There's probably one just has some what was a grog, mead or whatever, and just pounding it down and going, I think the Earth is flat, and you have a couple people on the other side of the table going, you're a fucking idiot. But
You're right. But back then, you actually could get killed for that. You know what I mean? Like they didn't play. We talked about that last night with the whole.
Yeah,
they
that was mess around, man. Yeah, they hung you, wait for you to start twitching, cut you down, then eviscerated you, and then draw and quarter you, and you're still alive maybe at that point. Yeah, that's not a good way to go. I don't think.
I would last 3 days in medieval times. 3 days. Okay. On Monday, V from Theomaka will be back with us to conclude his series on the issues with Islam. He was here 2 weeks ago with a very interesting. We went through the Islamic creation story last time. He's going to be wrapping that up on the 13th, which is Monday at 8 p.m. And then the next big main event that we're going to be having around here, Christians against dinosaurs, and now atheists against dinosaurs. We have Joe and I believe her name is Lily, if I'm not mistaken, from Christians Against Dinosaurs, that believe that fossils are a product of being planted a long time ago in order to confuse and
I don't know what's worse, the narrative that Satan had planted the fossils there to confuse us, or actual people somehow planted the fossils there. I think it's more likely Satan, because I don't even see how people in situ put fossils in rocks and permanization and all that stuff. So I think it's more likely that if it was the case, it would be Satan to do it to confuse us, which
that's one hell of a time
marginally, by the way.
That's one hell of a time capsule, though.
Maybe they have a time machine. That's more likely than either of those two.
It's bizarre. So Trevor Vale, who is a paleontologist, you probably recognize him from Joe Rogan's podcast. He's a regular on there. Very different kind of paleontologist. He has a bright green goatee and tattoos. Very cool guy, very knowledgeable guy, but he's going to be coming on to, once again, I can't believe I'm having to say this, but explain why dinosaurs existed, why dinosaurs were a thing. So that will be on the 14th at 8. And then finally on the 28th, get your reasoning and your logic and that sort of thing lined up and in order, because Cy 10 Bruggencate will be coming on to talk with Raul from Street Knowledge, and we will try to see if you can think rationally and not use your circular reasoning to justify God. That is, if it's been revealed to you in a way that only you can understand.
And literally, Cy just tweeted that out too. So thank you, Cy.
Could you be wrong about that, Steve?
I could be wrong about that, but I have Cy telling me that I'm not wrong. So I'm going to go with him.
Awesome.
Yeah. He was, I got to tell you, I enjoyed talking to Cy. I was very entertaining for a couple of hours. A very personal guy. I got to admit, he was very pleasant. So I enjoyed
very personable.
It'll be a great conversation coming up, I think, with him.
I'm looking forward to having him on. So that will be definitely good. Okay. That is all that I'm going to waste time on right now in terms of announcements. So let's get right into it. We will let these two fine gentlemen introduce themselves and a little bit about their channel and what they do. And we'll start. Let's start with the newbie. James, go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody.
Hi, I'm James, and I'm at the channel Modern Day Hysteria, a small little apologetics channel. Primarily, we like to look at cultural issues as well. We're starting to get into, and let's see. I've been doing it for just a couple of years, and for me, in a lot of ways, I'm trying to find like ways in which we can agree, as well as still disagree, no problem. But I think that you might say balance is one thing that I had mentioned to you guys I've enjoyed about your channel. In particular, Tim O'Neill, I really enjoyed that video, is that kind of you might say, even especially being willing to admit sometimes like, oh, okay, maybe I should give that argument up. So that's kind of what appealed to your channel, and which has had a feedback kind of influence on me. And now I'm starting to think of how I can critique some poor Christian arguments, namely arguments that Christians use, or like, let's not use that one. So very stoked to be here, though.
Well, we're stoked to have you, and it's good to hear after some of the subject matter that we cover. It's good to hear that there are still actual positive influences that we're having, and not just the chronic face palming that usually our show induces. So good deal. All right, Prophet of Zod, let everybody know where you are on YouTube and what you do, sir.
All right. Well, you can find me by typing the words Prophet of Zod into the YouTube search. I've had a channel for about 2 years now where I just talk about general issues related to God belief and atheism, explore certain logical arguments for and against God, and just look for the weak spots, talked about some of the conclusions I've come to, and started branching over into shamefully blasphemous cartoons and stuff like that. There's a lot of variety to it, which I've tried to kind of tone down, but that's about it in a nutshell.
And guys, I can't stress enough that you need to go check out his cartoon series, because the writing on it is phenomenal. Like I pay attention to those when I watch, other people's videos, and what sets you apart is that the writing is just so well done. I mean, it's like you have a team of people putting those scripts together. It's just very well put together and just very well done. So go check it out, guys. Not now, after the show. Make sure it's after the show, but check it out. So I figure that the way we'll begin is to let James kind of run through his why he believes that there is a God, and what kind of, I guess, arguments that he would use to justify that. I think we decided that we were going to, in a way, incorporate Pascal's wager, but I'm going to let James kind of speak to how that applies to things on his side.
Yeah, sure. So my beliefs hinge upon both evidential and pragmatic argumentation. So evidential just would mean what are more typical arguments for theism, like the argument from contingency, as well as the argument for the resurrection based on historical data. And then pragmatic arguments would be the arguments like Pascal's wager, that they don't actually argue that there's a God that exists. They really only argue that you're rational to believe in a God. So that's just one thing where sometimes people get snagged, is I want to make it clear that when I argue for Pascal's wager today, I'm not saying like, therefore God exists. I'm only saying it's most rational to believe. And, Pascal's wager, one thing I want to mention too before we talk about it, is that it's fun that we get to talk about it because, for one thing, it's probably the most hated argument there is, both among atheists and probably, if you ask like Christians, it's controversial, though I'll admit, plenty of them use it, but a lot of Christians don't like it. Even after I became a Christian, I didn't like Pascal's wager for a number of years. So in particular, with regard to Pascal's wager, Pascal put it in a way that I think was oversimplified at the start. It has problems that that just definitely need to be changed. And so today I'll argue for theism being what you get from Pascal's wager, or some type of Pascalian wager, rather than a lack of belief. But with regards to whether or not you get Christian theism, I certainly don't think that Pascal showed that, because he had a false dichotomy there. But so that's kind of where I stand with those. Hopefully that's a good briefing on it.
Okay. And you want to follow up on that, Zod?
Yeah, I tend to agree that Pascal's wager is not a good argument for God, or for, in my opinion, any form of theism, which is where we might diverge a little bit on this topic. I think that it's really hard to articulate the objections in any original way, because we've all been down this path, and everyone I think has done their obligatory Pascal's wager video if you have an atheist or even Christian channel. But it's pretty clear there is no compelling reason that it leads you to a specific God. It doesn't protect you from the dangers of other gods, which I think is why he's expanding to theism in general versus leading you to Christian belief. And it just, it fails to take into account how likely the danger is that you're dealing with. To me, the chances that a God is going to burn me for eternity because I don't believe in him is extraordinarily low, to the point that it's not compelling at all. And I think if you don't already believe in a specific faith or in any kind of theism, Pascal's wager really isn't going to move you any closer to that. It's along the lines of somebody coming to my house and telling me, if you buy this stone for $50, your house will be protected from dragons. The risk of the dragons is way worse than the cost of the stone, but the odds against it are so slim that it's not worth my time. And that's the way I see Pascal's wager as far as compelling me to believe in a God.
That's great. So Kyle, sorry, Kyle, did you want me to go, or do you want me to
No, this is a conversation between Steve and I. Will kind of step in if we have a question or if it starts to veer off, too far. But this is a conversation between the two of you, so you go right ahead.
Yeah, we'll only jump in if it's kind of go down rabbit holes or there's some clarification that needs to be. You guys are doing fine though, so just go for it.
You got it. Great. Okay, so we'll let her roll. Yeah, I think we have some agreement and disagreement there. So we definitely agree that you don't get Christian theism. I do think you still get a form of theism. And I think the reason that you get a form of theism, and we'll talk about your objection, namely what's kind of a reductio, where it's like, well, wait a minute. In the literature on Pascal's wager, they call it Pascal's mugger, in which if, let's say, someone comes up to you, they say, give me all your money, I'm a supernatural agent. If you don't give me all your money, you've got hell. And if you do give me all your money, you've got an infinite reward. I think that the reason that's actually a useful reductio, that's a good argument from your side, but I still think it's something that theists can answer. But nonetheless, the reason it's good is because Pascal's wager, the beauty of it is that when you look at the standard decision theory equation for how we make decisions, so we have to, hopefully we'll agree on, I think we will agree on, decision theory just says there are there's more than one potential state of the world. So for example, we think maybe Christianity, maybe Islam, maybe atheism, like positive atheism. And so then we have to decide, okay, which action should we take? And so even if you have a credence, and this is one thing where Zad and I disagree, like the standard decision theory equation would say that even if you give Christianity a 0.01% chance likelihood of being true, it's game over. And so the reason it's game over is that it's game over in the sense that you have a strong reason to believe it. And now you might have to pick among the different supernatural types of belief. But when you multiply 0.01 by infinity, namely an infinite reward, your expected utility for choosing to believe, and if that action, or I should say state of the world, is actually true, it's an infinite payout. And so now we can decide on, like, what are we going to do with regards to, like, okay, well, which religion? We can talk about that, but it's not a downfall. And in fact, it's actually the strength of Pascal's wager that even if you have a really small credence, when you multiply it by infinity, it just swamps every other. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. The issue I take with that line of reasoning, though, is the assumption that you can multiply that chance by infinity. Basically, that builds in the odds of Christianity being extremely low, or of any religion being extremely low, are tied to the value of the reward. Essentially, if we all started with ground zero and we're not thinking in terms of any religion or anything we can't prove, we have one life, 70, 80 years we have here on Earth to do with as we see best, to do right by ourselves and do right by others and to live the most constructive life possible. To say that is devalued or negated by an equation where something, a point whatever one chance multiplied by infinity, is really starting with a theistic assumption, and one that cannot be proven. So, if I sitting on the outside, not being a theist, and having somebody come to me with that proposition, I would be, wait a minute, why am I multiplying this low odd by infinity? Why am I going to take that for granted? I see no reason that infinity exists or eternity past my life exists. So to be compelled to alter my life and to use my limited time here on Earth based on a promise of infinite reward, it doesn't come off as compelling to anybody outside the religion, in my opinion.
Yeah, so we don't have to assume that it's the case, though. All you have to do is, if you give any of these religions a non-zero probability, which you should, and the reason is because, like, probability experts would say you should only assign a zero credence to things that are like a logical contradiction, like a squared circle. So even if we give Christianity a 0.00001% chance, when you do the standard equation for decision theory, namely, like, we have action A, believe in Christianity. If it's true, 0.01 times infinity gives me an infinite payout. If it's false, well, it depends on what else might be true. If atheism is true and I bet on Christianity, not really seeing a loss there. Now, if, let's say, Islam is true, well, now I'm in trouble, because now I'm going to hell because I was a Christian. And in fact, Islam is true. So we'd have to figure out, you might say, like, what's the potential cost? But I mean, if you don't agree with like the standard decision theory model, which I think is like, that comes with a cost, because decision theory underlies like behavioral parts of behavioral economics as a whole, psychology, sociology in some cases. So that, like, this is a major theory that I would say there's no reason you can't multiply your probability by infinites, and why you might have to compare infinites afterwards, because even in like set theory, you have different infinites that you can compare. Like, this isn't like a bizarre thing to do that. You know what I mean?
Can I jump in it real quick? Because I think you're making a little bit of a mathematical problem there. First of all, you can't mathematically ever multiply anything by infinity. Infinity is not a mathematical operand that you can use with a binary operator. So you can't say like 5 times infinity. It's not mathematically sound. And the other thing, the zero probability is not just for things that are impossible, because people are in the live chat going nuts right now about your math. You can have a zero probability of something, but not be impossible. It's called infinite probability distribution. So you're saying a lot of things that are just not mathematically correct. So I had to jump in and kind of correct that for the live chat was going nuts there for a second.
Yeah. So in terms of like the theoretical math, we're just siding with different experts. So I would side with the experts that say you should only assign a zero credence to something that's a logical contradiction. Like, I'd be willing to talk about. So do you understand when I mean that I say something like a squared circle? That's something that's like logically impossible.
What's the percentage of getting a rational number if you throw a dart at the real number line? It's 0%, because you're more likely to get a rational number. You're never going to actually get a rational number. 0%, but it's not impossible. It's considered to be what's called infinite line or infinite density distribution. So it is 0%. And if you want to see a video on it, go look at Weihart's transcendental darts.
Okay. Well, so
that's math.
Maybe
sorry, Zod. I just
no, that's fine.
I had to correct the math on that.
Yeah, I can understand that. My issue, though, doesn't even really boil down to the technicalities of the math as much as how does this thought process influence the decision making of anybody who doesn't already hold to the assumptions of the religion, whatever shape it takes. And I think it still really doesn't. I guess my question would be to you, just to clarify, are you saying that then the odds of Christianity and theism being true aren't a factor or don't need to be a factor in whether or not you respond to it? Simply the level of punishment and reward that is articulated by a person coming to me with a proposition, should that compel me to take it seriously, regardless of the plausibility or likelihood of it?
Oh no, like the probability does matter for sorting out infinites after the fact. So like, if you grant, now I agree that with Steve that you can argue, say, hey, we can't even use infinites in the decision theory equation. That's a debate to be had. I'd concede that. I don't side on that side of it. And there are even atheists that would agree with me, like Alan Hayek, who would say that it's not an inherent problem using infinites within this. But nonetheless, if we do grant that you have a non-zero probability, when you multiply an infinite by a tiny credence of 0.01, you should take that seriously if you want to maximize your own utility.
So I would ask you then, is there any possible threat or reward that a person could put into words that you should not respond to then? Because based on the thought process you're describing to me, literally anything a person could come to me on the street and explain to me, I should be compelled then to worry about. There would be no filter to how I decide what threats and rewards to shape my life around and which not to. And really, I'd be paralyzed by the lack of any kind of intelligent assessment of whether something's a threat to me. I'd be responding to literally anything somebody put into words.
Yeah, I get your great question. The answer is you actually, at some point, you're going to have to decide on which infinity you prefer. And the way in which you do that is, let's say, theoretically, you give Christianity a 0.01% probability. But let's say this kook that you meet on the street, you give like a 0.0001% probability. You could use a decision theory based, you could say, deciding factor or criteria to determine you want to go with one over the other. And the way is, let's say you think of, I'm comparing Christianity and Islam, and I think there's 10 units of pleasure per day in heaven, let's say. And that's the most you can have because they both describe themselves as being like the best you can have. If that's the case, I can say, okay, 0.01 for Christianity times 10 units compared to 0.0001 for the kook on the street times 10 units would give me a higher amount in the first equation for that day compared to the other equation, which considers the kook on the street. So you'd have a greater amount of pleasure per day, which you should also consider in terms of your overall outcome.
So basically, and I'm not trying to make fun, but just literally trying to get a sense of what you're saying here. Are you literally saying then that one of the main compelling things that should get you to believe in something is how much somebody promises you as reward or punishment if it's true? Like it sounds like you're saying the more good stuff somebody says is going to happen to you if you believe in something, the more you should be compelled to believe in what they're telling you.
Decision theory would say that when you consider your potential reward, if that goes up, then your probability for something might be low, but nonetheless, you should wager on that decision if, when you do the math, you find that the probability of, let's say, state of the world A happens to be true and you happen to believe in it. If the reward, when you add that to the potential cost of making that decision, namely believing in A, if that outweighs the same decision for, let's say, going with B instead, then you should go with it. So in other words, to answer your question in a more direct way, like absolutely the degree of the reward or punishment does have an influence on your utility calculation. Yeah.
Right, but I'm saying that you need to take into account the likelihood of something before that even becomes part of the conversation. I mean, my grandfather used to get 24 pieces of mail a day saying that if he were only to send in $25, that he was going to get $100,000 million reward. If we're just talking about weighing the amount he's being expected to contribute as a processing fee to what he's going to get, I mean, we'd be sending people checks left and right. And the problem is we wouldn't be taking into account the plausibility that he's really won the lottery 50 times a day. Like,
yeah, no, well, here's what we would say is just that the reason he shouldn't, and the reason he's been smart to not mail back all of those is because he has a super low credence in whether or not he's going to get a reward for that. So when you multiply a super low credence by $50,000, so for example, like let's say it's 0.0001 credence times 50,000, the payout, the potential payout if he did send in a check is going to be still pretty small. Now, if you use an infinite though, and like I said, I understand people disagree on using infinites in decision theory, but nonetheless, there are, I think, arguments that you could use for why it's acceptable. When you multiply 0.001 by infinity, it swamps all other things.
So you're saying then that in the example with my grandfather, the problem is I took something that is where the odds are so low that they're implausible, and I multiplied it by $1 million. The problem is not that the odds were exceedingly low, but that that I didn't not multiply exceedingly low odds by 1 million because somebody didn't invent an infinite reward for him versus $1 million reward.
I want to make sure I understand the question. Sorry.
Okay. Basically, when somebody tells my grandfather, mail in $25 and you'll win $1 million, the problem I see with that is not the fact that they didn't offer him infinity dollars or eternal life. The problem is that the whole thing is implausible and I can tell that somebody's scamming him. So with the problem there is the plausibility of the proposition. And that's the same thing with a theistic proposition. People are telling me to believe in something that's invisible, in something that has never been demonstrated as a reward or punishment, and that only happens after you die and nobody can show it to me. That is as plausible or less plausible than believing that the most recent piece of mail that came into my grandfather means he won the lottery. So the problem is not the amount of reward being offered. In fact, if somebody offers me infinite reward, that just makes it sound like they're trying a little bit too hard. The problem is whether I have a plausible reason to believe in it. I mean, we could switch the scenario if we want to deal with infinite punishment and reward. And if my child says there is a ghost downstairs, and if I go down there by myself, they're going to torture me, maybe for eternity. they've managed to put something into words just like Christianity has. So then the problem becomes, how plausible is this? And that's what I'm saying. There is something that can always be articulated that is going to multiply infinity by 0.0 whatever. And it always comes down to, is this plausible? Is there a reason to even get me into gear to considering this?
Well, if you multiply, so agreed, some would say you can't. I think you can multiply an infinite by, like, let's say a tiny credence. If you grant that, you have to, like, this is just the equate, like, do you not accept decision theory? Like, so in other words, like, in decision theory, you have to multiply the probability by the reward. So if you have a probability of 0.0001 for the male giving you $1 million payout, and the same probability for Christianity, like namely the Christian heaven, the reason that you wager on the Christian heaven is because when you multiply that same probability by the reward of Christian heaven, if you're right, it's way bigger compared to if you multiply in, you know, 1 million by 0.0001.
We actually have a statistician in the live chat, actually, if you want to like try to formulate in a way that will make sense, because he's actually a friend of mine, and he's saying the same things I am saying about your numbers here, not working out for probability. Do you want to kind of like direct it toward him for a second too? Because
yeah,
it's kind of getting to be a mathematical kind of probability thing. And the problem is, I think your math is flawed. And I don't know if Zod wants to go down that route, if he wants to talk more about the argument itself, because you're making a mathematical argument.
Yeah, we can go down that path if somebody wants to. I'm not particularly interested in the specific math of it, because I think this whole idea is so easily destroyed by counterexamples where you can come up with comparable situations without needing to break down the math.
Sure.
I mean, we can take, if the problem is the $1 million thing, like I said, if my child says there's a ghost downstairs and I go down there by myself, I'm going to burn for eternity. You know, anybody can promise something that involves infinite reward and infinite punishment. Something needs to enter into the equation to make it plausible, or else it's just purely nonsense. And I think the problem with Pascal's wager, the fundamental one, I think is it's essentially a circular argument, because it can be applied, like I said, literally to anything people can put into words. And so if that's all that Christianity is bringing to the table, it has nothing. It's nothing but one more person saying you can have infinite reward or infinite punishment based on something I'm just asserting to you. So there needs to be something behind that assertion.
If I said, James, if I said, give me all your money and I promise you I'll give you eternal salvation, would you assign any probability to that?
Oh yeah, like if you said I'll give you exactly what you said, I'd give it like a 0.00001% likelihood. And so you're right, Steve, that if I'm consistent, I would have to say, whoa, that multiplied by Steve's infinite reward means I should give Steve that money. The reason that I wouldn't is because if you have like let's say a credence that's higher in an exclusive, another exclusive worldview or idea that also offers an infinite payout, then you actually should prefer that one. So for me, it's Christianity. So we can talk about why I think it, you know, I can try to argue why you guys should prefer some sort of exclusive form of theism too. But so for me, the Christian worldview would say that there aren't any supernatural agents other than God that has this ability to like offer me eternal bliss or eternal punishment. And so I think that that would be inconsistent with the Christian worldview. And so if I have a higher credence in the Christian worldview, well, then I should go with that one. And the reason is, we had mentioned this before, that if you have, whether it be your supernatural offer or if it's, let's say, Islam, is that you can take the probability of, let's say, I give Christianity, let's say, just whatever it is, a greater probability than Steve being able to deliver on this or being, you know, truthful. Then when I multiply the potential gain I get per day, so like in Islam, like the 10 units of pleasure in heaven per day versus Christians 10 units of pleasure per day, my higher probability assessment of Christianity leads me to pick Christianity because I get a higher amount of pleasure units per day when I multiply it by the probability.
I get 72 virgins if I turn Muslim. I think that's higher for me. So I guess you convinced me I'm going to become Muslim.
Well, so I get what you're saying, but I think all the religions would say that their heavens are like the best thing you can have. And so if they are the best thing you can have, and so that the God of that religion can maximize your pleasure per day at whatever level, you know, by doing whatever he does, by, let's say, changing your brain chemistry, then you still have to multiply that probability. Now, here's the thing, Steve. If you or Azad have a higher probability in Islam than Christianity, then yeah, you would actually, Pascal's wager would drive you to Islam rather than Christianity.
Did I run that by us again? Because I'm having the same look that Zod's having.
Okay,
To
so
make sure that we
So
heard you right.
are you basically saying that if we think that one religion has higher probability than another, and all religions are saying, boy, I'm going to give you the best thing you can possibly imagine, then you should go with the one that seems more likely?
yeah.
Okay.
Now, here's why. Because I know what you're maybe thinking. You might be thinking, whoa, James, how inconsistent, because if you multiply 0.01 or 0.02 by infinity, they both give you infinity. But what you should do as a tiebreaker is you should say, how many units of pleasure would I get per day in one day of heaven for those religions? It would both be 10. But if you have a higher probability in Christianity, like let's say 4 percentage points rather than 3 percentage points, well, then you would get 0.4 units of pleasure in the Christian day of heaven rather than 0.3 units of pleasure in the Muslim heaven. So you'd have actually higher utility under one rather than the other.
Okay, so if I were to tell you right now, believe in me, and you're going to have a better per day, more pleasure per day for eternity than you ever would in heaven. Don't believe in me, and you're going to have worse pain per day than you ever would experience in hell. What then keeps you from believing in me instead of Christianity?
So remember that the religions would say that their afterlife, whether it be heaven or hell, is as good or as bad as it can get. So
Right, but I'm telling you that mine's better than heaven.
right, well, it doesn't make sense that yours could be better than the thing that is as good as it can get. That's incoherent.
So the fact that something does or doesn't make sense factors in your decision-making process?
Yeah, wait a minute. You're talking about infinities, by the way, and he's just saying that his infinite heaven is infinity plus 1, if you're going to allow for that, because it's still nonsensical, because you cannot multiply anything by infinity. You can't add anything finite to infinity. It's still infinity, right? Infinity plus any finite process is infinite, but you don't treat it like a binary operator. But he's just saying, hey, if you're allowing for infinites, he's just saying that, you know what, he's whatever you can conceive, he can conceive something greater.
But if it's already, like we had said, is if, like, let's say Islam or Christianity says that their religion, or I should say their heaven, is the greatest conceivable thing, then it can't be greater than that, because it's already defined as the greatest conceivable thing. So it's incoherent to say that it's better than the greatest conceivable thing.
Well, I've heard that somebody had defined what I'm saying as the greatest conceivable thing before they came up with Christianity. So really, Christianity is the one trying to one up what I had already said was the most conceivable.
Right.
And I'm not just trying to be sarcastic. What I'm saying, well, it comes off sarcastic, I'm sure. But the point I'm trying to get at is what you're essentially arguing is that whoever promised you the most infinite best everything first wins, and everybody else is saying nonsense because them promising you the most infinite plus 1 is nonsense.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, obviously, it clearly wasn't me or somebody I have access to, but I would not be surprised if some religion had promised something better than heaven before Christianity came up with it. And how is that even a factor?
Well, but no, we agree on one thing, namely that if you have these probabilities that might differ, like all these different religions seem to be saying, like, we've got the greatest conceivable thing. If they do, well then, like, I wouldn't say that Christianity has a better, like a more pleasurable heaven than Islam or any other religion. Like, if they're both called the greatest conceivable thing, like, that's the maximum pleasure you could have in either case. So to me, it just doesn't make sense to say that you can offer something better than the greatest conceivable thing.
Okay, yeah, I would say that that's true, and along the same lines, most people would consider it nonsense if anybody came up to you and offered you the greatest conceivable thing anyway. And this is where I think Pascal's wager is essentially circular. I don't think anybody would accept this kind of thing. If somebody just came up on the street and said, I will give you the best possible thing if you accept this thing that I can't offer you proof for, the odds for it are exceedingly low, but it's just going to be super awesome. It's the best thing you can ever imagine. For one, it's not very believable. Two, the fact that they are even saying that should be a red flag, that they're just offering you something that sounds honestly kind of childish. And the reason I think it's kind of a circular argument or circular thought process is the only people who are going to accept this are people who have already grown up in that system, who already, not necessarily grown up, but who are already accepting that system. It's only to back into a belief system you already buy into. You would never accept that if somebody came up to you on the street and just blurted that out. So the argument itself doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't get any traction unless you already believe.
Well, let me just mention a couple of things. One is to call it childish really isn't an argument. I might as well call everything you said childish. Why don't we all go home? So like that's just rhetoric. But the second thing is when we talk about this, and I know I'm being picky, but let's talk about the fact that we have these different ones with the same payout per day. If I have a higher utility in Christianity than I do for the strange person who offers me this infinite reward on the street, you should go with the one that you have the higher probability in. Now, maybe you would have more confidence in like the strange person you meet on the street than like you give them a higher probability of possibly being true or honest than you would for Islam or Christianity. But I don't think that, I think that there are, you could say, arguments for Christianity or maybe even data for Islam that make it more likely than the strange man you met on the street for being an actual true state of the world.
Okay.
Would you not agree with that?
No. First off, just to be clear, I'm not saying childish, like I'm just throwing the word childish at your point of view. I'm just proposing that if somebody were to just walk up to us at random and offer this, tell you, I will give you the infinite best of everything, I think you would probably find that childish if it were just presented to you outside the context of a belief system you already held. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm not flippantly throwing the word childish at what you're trying to tell me. I'm just saying that most of us, if we were just to hear that out of the blue, I think it would sound childish to most of it, and it would sound childish to me.
Given that it's a human, yeah, we agree.
What's that?
Given that it's like the idea that a human could offer that seems childish, but
or if a human came up to me outside the context of a religion I already believed in, if a human came up to me and said a non-human thing can give you the very best of everything, I think most people would find that childish too, unless of course it was a religion they already bought into.
Yeah,
to just hear that idea proposed, stripped clean of something you already believed in.
We'd have to look at the arguments for reasons to believe that there's an omnipotent God or that there's a God in eternity, and in particular, like arguments from the Kalam or contingency in order to justify why we have different probabilities on that, because that I'm sure influences it. But
sorry, go ahead. Finish.
Well, I just want to say, I don't think I've heard an answer from you with regard to, we can adjudicate between different views if they have a higher probability. Let's say units of like 10 units of pleasure per day in heaven. If I have a higher probability in Christianity, then how is that not giving me a better reason to prefer Christianity over Islam or the guy on the street? Because Christianity, like these two claims are incompatible. Christianity would say like, no, other than God, there's nobody that can give you an eternal or infinite reward or punishment. So I would go with whatever exclusive worldview has the highest probability. Why wouldn't I do that?
I don't know. We have some people in live chat want to know where we can go purchase some pleasure units, or can they Patreon in pleasure units? That's what they want to know. Sure, if you can figure out how to do that, Kyle and I will be cool with that. I think we'll take some pleasure units.
Is anybody else here?
Yeah, I wanted to talk over that because I didn't want to get it on
okay
flagged. So
go ahead.
I cut in on that because I didn't know where that was coming from.
Go ahead, gentlemen.
So basically, you're saying I haven't addressed the issue of how likely Christianity is or other religions are. Is that
no? Like why does? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're fine. No, correct me if I'm wrong. I want to address the right topic.
My thought is, if I give Christianity a higher credence than this guy on the street, and these are incompatible views because Christianity would say like, no, other than God, nobody can give you this infinite reward or punishment. If I have
sorry, just can you pause and let me clarify real quick? When you say credence, do you mean odds that you think it's true or reason to believe in
correct.
it?
Thank you. Yeah, correct. And so if I believe in Christianity is more likely than this guy actually being truthful in what he's saying, then, I would multiply, or with Islam, I multiply the units of pleasure per day. Let's say it's 100 possible units or 10 possible units, whatever you want to have as the max per day. I multiply that by my credence for that particular religion or view. And then I just go with, hey, that one gives me more units of pleasure per day, which should be the tiebreaker. Like, why isn't that a good tiebreaker?
Okay, so first off, I would say that yes, you should take into account the likelihood of something being true. Is that I don't disagree with that. And from my perspective, unless I'm misunderstanding Pascal's wager or at least your take on it, that's the whole issue, is that there needs to be a reason to believe in something. What you say, giving credence to it or finding reason to believe that it's true, that's the whole problem. And so that's where I see Pascal's wager as a non-starter, is it kind of puts the cart before the horse. It talks about the risks and rewards before you've really even gotten into the odds of why should I believe this to begin with. And so if we're throwing odds of it being true into it, we're kind of stepping outside Pascal's wager, at least as I understand it. And so if you're talking about a different version of it or a different idea of it, that's something else. So, if we're talking about the odds, then we're backing away from Pascal's wager, and now the conversation becomes a lot more about why should I believe there's a God anyway?
Well, let's say, Zod, that you and I agree, let's say you took the position that you say, hey, my interpretation of theoretical math says that I can assign Christianity or Islam a 0% probability and be rational in doing so. Then you're right, Pascal's wager would be useless for you. I don't think you should do that, but Steve has mentioned that there are people that might disagree with me, and that's a debate to be had. I'll concede that I walked past that without acknowledging it, that there's a debate to be had there. But if you do give it a non-zero credence, a positive non-zero credence, then I think that you should actually consider that. And like I said, you haven't given me any reason to think that my tiebreaker of calculating units of pleasure per day is a bad tiebreaker. That one works just fine. And so I don't see why you wouldn't. If you're using the standard decision theory equation, you multiply your potential reward by your probability assessment.
When you talk about a tiebreaker, what are we breaking a tie between? I apologize if I missed that.
No, you got it. If I say Christianity or Islam or the guy on the street that offers me an infinite reward or heaven or something, if I look at those and I say, okay, well, if I multiply my credence of 4% for Christianity by the infinite reward, then I have no better reward with Christianity compared to my 3% credence for Islam that I multiply by the infinite reward of Islam, right? So the tiebreaker then would say, okay, so when you look at the big picture, no reason to prefer one over the other, but the tiebreaker would say you should also look at the units of pleasure per day and calculate what you get for those. Because, so if you look at 0.4, like 4 percentage points times 100 units of pleasure per day, I'd get my, calculation would give me 4 units of pleasure per day for Christianity, but 3 percentage points times 100 units of pleasure per day would give me 3 units of pleasure per day under the Islamic heaven.
I can see what you're getting at, but I think we very rarely conceive of possibilities in that way. I don't think most of us have things broken down into something being a 3 or 4% possibility or whatever like that, and then try to break ties based on the rewards or punishment. I think for most people, and this is the issue for me as a non-believer, and I think for most people as non-believers, we don't really see that 3 or 4% reason to believe in any religion whatsoever. To us, it sounds like, to make an analogy, and again, I think what you're describing, at least from my perspective, falls apart given the number of analogies that are perfectly analogous unless you think there's really good solid proof to believe in something. Because again, literally anything somebody can describe, if you think there's any possibility, like you mentioned, unless we can, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but what I heard is unless we can definitively assign a 0% possibility, basically that something's internally contradictory or can't be possible, that you should at least consider it possible. And then from there, you start factoring in the rewards and punishments tied to it, right? Is that
right?
Yep. Is that fair? Okay. The problem I keep running into is that I live in a world where I'm interacting with the environment around me, with the people around me. I start to get a sense, since I've been a child, of what is a reasonable threat and what is not, and I respond appropriately to that. I've also started to get a sense of when people tell me things that sound really far-fetched, I need to filter those at some point and deal with things that actually impact my life, deal with things that realistically might or might not be true. And I simply can't be responding to everything somebody puts into words. If somebody says, you better not go to work today because there's a flame-breathing rhinoceros in the middle of the street on your way, yeah, I mean, that's not a 0%, it's not a 0% proposition in that I cannot break it down. Okay, maybe fire-breathing part, but let's just say a giant rhinoceros. I don't know, something that's not a 0%.
Why not? Dwayne Grish said dragons could breathe fire, so why not a fire-breathing rhinoceros, right?
Sure.
Go for it.
But basically, the problem is it doesn't have to be, you don't have to prove 0% probability for something to not respond to it and to continue living your life intelligently based on, realistic threats you see around yourself. And so I think part of the disconnect here is that you're viewing these propositions from within a belief system that you already take seriously and already see reason to believe in. I have never really been given any good reason to believe in Christianity. And so given that, this just sounds like one more person on the street, telling me that, we've been round and round in circles on this. But it just sounds like one more person offering me infinite reward and infinite punishment, like all the other possible people. Like, so where does a non-believer engage with this? Where does this become useful for somebody's decision-making versus just being a tool that Christians can use to describe why they believe what they already believe?
Let me try to meet you halfway. So I think that if you take the position of the statistician that Steve mentioned, who says you can't plug infinities into a decision theory equation, fair enough. The argument's irrelevant for you. Or if you take the position that, hey, I have two exclusive views, like let's say Christianity or Islam or the guy on the street, and I assign all of them the exact same credence of like 1%, then it's like, okay, you're in a challenge in that you don't have a tiebreaker anymore because you can't multiply different credences by units of pleasure per day. I think though that you would be nonetheless, I mean, are you imagining this guy on the street is natural or supernatural? Or, I mean, obviously he's not natural, people can't do that. So you must be like, assuming he must be like maybe supernatural, right?
No such assumption is really needed. Any time we get a message like this communicated to us, it comes from humans, whether it's verbally or through a book. And so, so basically the guy in the street thing, it's not a particular type of person. It's not their ability to offer something or not offer us something. It's just conveying the fact that all of these propositions have been brought to us by humans. And so unless they give us some compelling reason to believe in it and incorporate that whole thought process into our decision-making process, it's just,
yeah, I mean,
there's no reason to engage with it.
I get what you're saying. So here's the thing. You can say, I don't think you can multiply infinities in decision theory. Fair enough. You can say, I'm not a decision theorist, and you can challenge the whole thing. Fair enough. But if you're going to say like, well, no, I am a decision theorist, and I think that you can plug in infinite utilities, but I apologize.
I apologize. Can we pause for just 1 second?
Yeah.
Sure. It'll just be a moment.
Sure.
Absolutely.
While you're doing that, yeah, the thing that about the probabilities, there's a reason why you cannot take infinity and just say, I'm going to take infinity in times it by a specific probability. Okay. Infinity is not a number. And so when you have what's called a binary operator, like a multiplication sign or an addition sign, it means you have two things on either side, binary. So you have an operator that's taking these two things, these operands, and doing something with them to get some other real number or some other number. So what's happening is you're taking a non-real number, because infinity is a non-real number, and you're trying to stick it with an operand to get some kind of output. And unfortunately, math doesn't work that way. That's why you cannot use in any type of probabilistic thing that what you're saying infinity in those ways, whether it be theory, decision-making theory or any other theory. It's a no-no to use infinity. Now, there is abusive notation where people will see things like infinity plus one, and that's usually to describe a concept rather than an actual mathematical operation.
Right. Okay. So admittedly, I haven't read this literature in a deep way. So it's a superficial understanding on my part. So I'm conceding I could be wrong about whether or not you can get away with this, but I would note that there are atheists, philosophers of religion, like expert, decision theorists, who have noted that it's not a problem, at least Alan Hayek. So maybe it's that he's wrong too. That could be, but I think that I'm not willing to take the idea of like, oh no, it's just there's no way it can work. But I'm willing to concede I could be wrong.
Was it a Bayesian analysis, by the way? Did that term ever come up? Bayesian? Ever heard
Yeah.
that? Was they were doing a Bayesian analysis?
Well, decision theory, I think
Because decision theory uses a lot of Bayesian type of
it does.
equations. Yeah.
Right.
Because I can tell you right now, it wouldn't work for Bayesian. Because Bayesian
Okay.
also deals with prior probabilities, dealing with observations that we've had. But
Yeah. I mean, I mean, this is a future talk we could have on that. It's worth having, but I do think that there are Bayesians that would say it's acceptable. However, I'm open to the idea I could be wrong. Now, if Zod were to say, I don't accept infinities in decision theory, or I don't even like, maybe he doesn't accept decision theory, I'd be fine with that. But I'm not okay with, I don't think it's a good, if you take the view that decision theory is good and that you should abide by it, and that you can use infinities in decision theory, then the fact that you have a super low credence, it doesn't matter. When you do the math, you're going to have an infinite reward, assuming those two things I mentioned. So I don't, it's like when you say that, you know, like I don't have a good enough probability of it, I'm like, well, it's decision theory compels you. Like this is what rational agents maximize their own preferences. So you should run the equation, and then you should decide on which one is more likely using the tiebreaker.
where do you get your probability from Christianity? People have asked that in the live chat, and I'm kind of curious myself. What number do you ascribe to Christianity, and where do you get that particular value from?
Yeah, I get it. Maybe like I'd say it's like an 89%, something like that. And then it's, so this is where it's like difficult to understand. For me personally, it's difficult. I haven't thought through these issues to the fullest extent of like, well, the argument from contingency doesn't give me Christianity any more than it gives me Islam. So in what way does that like make me believe more toward Christianity? I would say, I guess in the way at least that it gives me a higher probability that the resurrection is possible. So the historical data for the resurrection, though, is the, you could say, discerning reason why I pick one form of theism rather than another. But
So did I overhear you say you have about 89% confidence in Christianity being true based on evidence?
yeah,
Okay.
like I go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
That's
Yeah,
a
that
0.989 probability, by the
to
way.
me that turns that into an entirely different type of conversation. Like, I'm not a mathematician. I can't really argue the multiplying small odds by infinity. I can say though that pretty confidently that most people or no people really make decisions that way when it comes to infinitely small possibility propositions. I don't think anybody takes something that is minuscule possibility, and just because a human being, and this is where I kept using the man on the street thing, just because somebody puts a reward or a punishment into words, we don't respond to minuscule possibility propositions. I don't, and I tend to think you don't either. And I think that I don't want to read into why you believe in Christianity or not, but for some reason, whether it was evidence or whether it's just the religion of your culture, whatever reason, it's not because you multiplied an infinite reward or punishment by a minuscule possibility.
Right.
And I just don't think we make decisions that way. And this is why I keep bringing up analogous decision-making situations. There is no other situation, or I would assert that there is, and I would challenge you to come up with another one, aside from a religion that people are culturally steeped in, where you're going to make these kinds of decisions based on just outlandishly infinitely small possibility propositions multiplied by infinities, just because somebody explained a reward. And we could keep going back in circles back to the math of the reward versus the possibility and all that stuff. But I just don't think anybody ever makes decisions that way, and that's why I think Pascal's wager is just a non-starter unless you have some starting point where you already believe in it, like some form of evidence.
Right. So I mean, it's true that Pascal's wager wasn't what made me a Christian. First, it was evidential arguments, and then you could say before I became a Christian and both after I became a Christian, I hated the wager. And then in graduate school, a couple of decision theorists or grad students, they said, hey, have you studied decision theory and these other answers to these problems? And they kind of chipped away at my unbelief. But the idea that most people don't do it that way, I would say that, well, from a decision theorist, they're just bad decision theorists. Like, that's it. Or you might say that they're not decision theorists at all, or they don't believe that you can use infinites. But the fact that people aren't rational, in other words, that the fact that they're not maximizing their own preferences is like, okay, yeah, they're not fully rational. I agree, but they should be. That's the point. Is decision theory would say rational agents maximize their own preferences, and if they aren't, they're not considering these religions, then they're just not being good decision theorists.
I'm not appealing to what most people do in terms of, you know, just appealing to popularity. I'm saying that it's essentially, we don't do that because it's absurd. It would paralyze our decision-making process if every time somebody put a threat or reward into words and explained it in a way that had a non-zero probability, that we responded to it in any way, even giving it minimal consideration. We simply don't have time. We don't have time for that. I don't have time for it, and I don't do it. I honestly, I don't want to speak for you, but I would think that you don't do that. I think you're more or less settled into Christianity as a religion. I don't think your mind's constantly in flux, evaluating new information about other religions or just things people might tell you. When I told you that I could offer you for following me a reward that's greater than heaven and punishment that's worse than hell, I don't think that that entered into your mind as a possibility that you're going to weigh against the infinite, you know, the level of whatever. And you can correct me on that, but I don't think we do that. And it's not because people don't understand reward theory. It's because we simply can't function that way. And it would be nonsense. It would leave us at the mercy of everybody who articulated something if we didn't expect really good evidence to respond to it. And so that's where we're kind of stuck.
But we wouldn't be at the mercy of it because I gave a tiebreaker in which you consider units of pleasure per day, which you never gave a refutation of, so we wouldn't really have a problem there. But the second thing is, we wouldn't have a problem because it's not like just because people don't do it or take the time to think through it. Okay, if they don't want to take the hard work, like the time to the hard work of doing their decision calculus, then I'm sorry they're not maximizing their own preferences and thus not being as rational as they could be. But that's not a good argument why we shouldn't be.
So are you saying that every time a person puts something into words and it has a very higher infinite level of reward or punishment, that our mind should automatically engage that? And so to put what I asked into a question, do you then, is your mind in flux in terms of constantly pondering Christianity versus Islam, worship of the Greek gods, Hindu gods, things I might just tell you randomly? Does your mind stop and engage with that? And do you seriously ponder the consequences of what I told you in your decision-making process?
Yeah, let me be real with you. If someone gave me more evidence for Islam than Christianity or for the guy on the street, then yeah, Pascal's wager should say I should actually go for those, because in the tiebreaker, those will come out ahead. Now, I think that there's more evidence for Christianity through the historical data for the resurrection compared to the guy on the street. But even if you say, oh, I'm in trouble because it's like, what religion do I choose? Or this guy on the street, which I would think has to be supernatural, because a natural agent couldn't, it doesn't make sense how that could be offered by a natural agent. I'm left with some version of theism still.
You're saying something supernatural can't be offered by a natural agent?
It can be offered, but it can be offered in the like verbal sense of like, hey, do you want this? But it can't be provided by.
Right.
So that gives me a reason to be some stripe of theist rather than atheist, which is the very thing I started with saying.
And maybe since we're right now at the hour and 10-minute mark of the hour and a half, maybe to kind of transition a little bit from this aspect into another before we get some questions from the live chat. James, do you mind giving like whatever you would consider your best reason or evidence for why you believe, so that we can kind of get a feel of what kind of led you over to the Christian side?
Yeah. So just so I don't surprise you guys later, because I don't want to seem like a jerk, I'm really sorry. I think I misunderstood. Like, I thought that we would go, like, I can go till like maybe 5:20. I thought that we were going to do 5 to 6. I'm really sorry. I think I didn't realize that was just between Zod and I. And so you guys, I didn't realize you had a Q&A. I'm really sorry about that.
Oh no, you're good. I mean, this was fun.
So how long do you have? About 20 more minutes, you think then?
Yeah, I can. Can you give me like maybe 15?
15 minutes? Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry,
No
guys.
problem.
So if you want to answer Kyle's question, and then I just have a follow-up, and maybe kind of go from there.
Okay. So, I mean, it's not like a single thing that like bumps me from 0 to 50%. I think it's like the cumulative case of like different arguments for theism give me a higher probability in theism. And then in light of that, like you could say it kind of like empowers the argument for the resurrection once you have those arguments for theism. Because if you don't have arguments for theism, then the argument for the resurrection is pretty weak, because it's kind of like, well, it's something, but we don't even know if a God exists. So how do we know if miracles are possible? You know what I mean? So I would say that it's kind of a combination of arguments like the contingency, the kalam, the argument for the resurrection, like the data, the moral argument. I'm at like maybe 51%. Evolutionary debunking arguments have made me a little bit nervous about the moral argument.
Well, let me stop right there. Can you give us like, I'm interested myself. What's the evidence for the resurrection?
So there are independent facts, you might say, that are best supported by the resurrection of Jesus from God, from the dead. And in particular, there are 3 facts that are, you might say, equally important in this argument. So they all ideally should be explained, because we have good evidence for 1, the appearances or perceived appearances of Jesus after the crucifixion by his disciples in different places and at different times over 40 days, that we have different historical documents attesting to. And these are independent, like, so for example, the Gospel of John would be independent from the Synoptics, and then the Creed in 1 Corinthians 15 would be independent of the Gospels itself. So we have numerous sources for that. The second would be that the tomb was empty after 3 days, of which we again have multiple independent sources that attest to it, as well as, you might say, archaeological, historical type arguments. So for example, it's far more difficult for Christianity to get off the ground in Jerusalem if there was actually an empty, or I should say not an empty tomb, if there was a body in there. It's hard to believe that Christianity could get off the ground, because the Romans could just drag the body out of the tomb and shut down Christianity pretty quick. So that's called the Jerusalem factor, and like historical, archaeological arguments. And then the origin of the disciples' belief itself, like this is a totally un-Jewish idea. They had admittedly believed that there would be a Messiah that would rise from the dead, but it wouldn't be until the end of time. And so it was counter-Jewish in that sense. And then it was obviously not the result of like an early Christian influence, because those were the first Christians that actually came up with they had these beliefs. So it wasn't like they were influenced by prior Christians, because they didn't exist. So those 3 facts taken together are best explained by the idea that Jesus was risen from the dead by God.
Okay. Zod, do you want to respond to that?
That opens up a huge new can of worms.
Well, briefly, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would note is that given the topic of the conversation being Pascal's wager, and if that's a good reason to engage with a new idea, I think the fact of the matter tends to be that we keep circling back to evidence, and that's kind of what I'm saying to begin with, is there needs to be good evidence for something. Asserting these different kinds of evidence for the resurrection and things like that, that's good in that it gets the conversation actually moving and gets us discussing some kind of actual reason to believe. I think those are extremely poor arguments. I mean, clearly I'm going to, and I respect the fact that, that's what you're presenting. I'm not trying to, belittle you in any way, but we've been down this road many times. I've done a series of recent videos about many things similar to this. Essentially what they come down to is that the Bible said it. And it comes from, we can call different books of the Bible multiple sources, but for various reasons that would take a long time to get into here, they aren't multiple independent sources. It's one holy book that is designed to promote the worship of somebody, and it's asserting things happen. We can say that there were 500 eyewitnesses. We can say that Jesus appeared here and there, but what we have is a book asserting this stuff, and it's the book that's invested in getting you to believe in it. So to me, it's just not it's a non-starter if we're going to,
Well,
but that's a long thing to open up.
I mean, that's honestly, I'll be frank too. I'm not at all persuaded by your argument, because even Bart Ehrman, who's an atheist in the sense of lacking a belief in a God, he himself would say that in his book, book titled "Did Jesus Exist?", that the New Testament sources, though being considered like a holy book, are definitely like, we have independent sources within the New Testament. So to just say like, oh, it's just a single book, like this is like it's not ahistorical. It's
I think I see our next debate.
Yeah.
It's anti.
I think I see our next debate right here.
It's just, that's not how scholars think about the New Testament sources. You can like argue they're not credible, fair enough. But to say that they're just one, when in actuality, even atheist scholars, like people with PhDs in this stuff, will say these are independent sources, such as, for example, the Synoptic Gospels and John, or Paul's epistles.
Right.
I think you meant one book.
I was simplifying and calling it one book. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
The problem is there's a lot there that needs to be unpacked that we simply don't have time to get into.
Yeah, that's a whole different discussion.
Generalities. There are a lot of reasons I don't see the Bible being a good source of multiple, mutually corroborating things that make the argument any more compelling. Clearly, it isn't just one book, and there are different sources in there. So, I was speaking in generalizations just because we don't have time to dig into this.
Yeah, Richard Carrier puts the mythicism of Jesus at 2/3% that he didn't exist. So, I mean, when you're talking about probability theory, but here's a couple points that I think need to be addressed. One, when Zod is spot on when he's talking about evidence in this particular case, because when you're talking about using Bayesian and you're talking about the theories you're appealing to, it's all based upon prior observations. Right? We have no prior observations of some of the things that Christianity is claiming, right? We have never seen resurrections. We've never seen people come from the dead, never seen water turn to wine. We've never seen any of these things. So it's very difficult to make a truly Bayesian analysis on that particular aspect of your argument, because that is what that is what decision theory would be based on, is what we've experienced before and what we've seen, and Zod would be calling that evidence, and I happen to agree with him on that. The other thing is, you mentioned a couple of things like the moral argument. One, yeah, evolution craps all over that. I hate to break it to you. Argument contingency. I just did a 2-hour hangout on that. We're going to be doing a part 2 with Cyrus the Skeptic, if you want to join that. And I've broken it down using Dr. Alex Malpass's analysis of why it's it's not a horribly bad argument. It's just not a good argument at all. It just doesn't get you anywhere. And third, let me run you my question. Let's suppose your analysis is correct, and everyone in here is Christian. I'm Christian, Cal's Christian, and Zod's Christian right now.
I'm definitely Christian.
He's the Kent Hovind of Christians right now. So we have all three very vastly different viewpoints. I'm a Calvinist.
Kind water.
He's a younger creationist who loves the word kind. And Zod, we'll put him as a
kind water.
Baptist. He looks like a Baptist. So all three of us are telling you, believe us, because Kyle being the younger creationist, Ken Hovind says, believe me or you're going to hell, because he's told us this quite a few times, right? You're all going to die, Steve. You're going to die, Steve. So you might as well believe me. So using your analysis, which one do you believe? Because we're all using the same appeal.
We love you.
It's still the same, what's called appeal or argumentum ad baculum, which means argument to the cudgel, or basically by force. That's what Pascal's wager distills down to, is believe me or suffer the consequences. And so all three of us being Christians.
Feeling like a whalebone?
The baculum? Yeah, I mean, same word, different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same word. But all three of us being very different Christians, how would you ever go about using Pascal's wager to determine which type of Christianity you should appeal to? Because if you appeal to mine and Zod's right, you're screwed. If you appeal to Zod and I'm right, you're screwed. It's a fallacious argument from the get-go for many different reasons. That's just one of them, because it doesn't tell you which one to believe. Right. Argument from threat is what it is.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought these up, Steve. These are great. So, and Zod's were great too. I don't want to.
Zod's smart.
I don't want to make it sound like these are so. I think that one thing we would disagree on is, and I don't want to take too much time on this, but it wouldn't be merely an argument of force. By saying that, you're completely ignoring the fact that we're trying to maximize pleasure in heaven as well. So it's a little bit one-sided in how do you explain it, but more importantly, it's based on just decision theory. You use the probabilities and the potential payouts or costs. Is that like, this is decision theory, Steve?
Well, it is force. I don't see how you can get around that. You're saying make the right decision or suffer eternal consequences. That's a threat, whether it's veiled or not veiled or explicit.
I think
How
he's
do
trying
you
to
get
say
around
there's
it?
a carrot as well as a stick, maybe.
Sure, absolutely. But even just having the carrot doesn't negate the fact that
Right.
you have that
Oh yeah,
thing.
I agree. Like I'm not.
And the worst part is I'm a Dostoevstic involuntarist, means I can't decide my own beliefs. So therefore, Pascal's wager fails because I cannot decide myself and will myself to believe something.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen that way. So it fails in that regard because they didn't understand back then how beliefs formulated.
Are you? I mean, you're bringing up new objections before I can respond to those first ones you brought up. If you can, basically, how about this? You brought up good objections. Would you be willing to have this discussion on Pascal's wager again, in which we move forward from the infinity objections? And now I'm going to answer your question, but hopefully you'll consider that question that I just asked.
To infinity and beyond.
So,
well, I think Zod wants to do a part two too, as well as Kyle on some of the things he brought up with why you think Christianity has good evidence. And
well, I mean, for me, though, I would love to talk more. I mean, I'd love to talk about that too, but the wager, especially what you brought up before about doxastic and voluntarism, I would love to talk about that too. But let me try to answer your question so I don't get sidetracked by myself. You're absolutely right. You have to have a way. One criteria you might use is, and it sounds like you're already saying you guys are all three exclusivist Christians that are saying, hey, James, pick our brand of Christianity. So in that case, you're right. There is a difficult position where the Christian has to say, okay, all exclusivists, and I already explained to Zod, though, that tiebreaker of, considering different units of pleasure per day would be the way in which I would break it. Now you can say, well, James, what if you have a same credence in all of us? You're right, then I'm in trouble. But you know what I wouldn't be? I wouldn't be an atheist. And this whole argument has been me saying you'd be better off as some stripe of theist, whether it be you types of, three Christian stripes or Islam or whatever else, rather than an atheist. So to be honest, I'm not sure how to answer your question. I don't know the answer. Because if the utilities are exact, or if the probabilities are exactly the same, you're right. I've got to think of something, but nonetheless, I'm better off with one of your three brands of Christianity rather than atheism. What was the other question? I think you asked another one. Sorry.
Oh, I was just telling you that the argument from contingency was not really.
Can I change mine to a polytheist next time? I want to be a Viking.
Well, with that, can I just mention one thing, that we do have one reason to prefer exclusive religions, because let's say Hinduism says, hey, like, be a good person and you'll be good. So I would actually have one reason to prefer certain religions based on their exclusivity, because if I wager on Christianity, I both get the payout of Christianity if it's correct and the payout of Hinduism if it's correct. But if I wager on Hinduism, I would only potentially get the payout of Hinduism if it's right. There is one thing. Go ahead.
Well, what about the payout for our existence here? Look at it. They're actually atheists. I'm agnostic, but we all don't have a belief in God. None of us believe in God, so we all have that one thing in common. So I think it has a higher utility from a social standpoint, perhaps, to have non-belief, right? Because if I'm looking at the damage that religion has done to society, and this is slightly hypothetical, but slightly true as well, and especially the invasiveness of creationism into our school system, and the detrimental effects that religion has had on various types of things in society, especially education, then I'm willing to put aside. I'm willing to put aside my eternal way, may or may not be the case, and rely on the fact that maybe there's a just God out there that realizes that I'm trying to do this for the benefit of humanity. And if there's a fair and loving, all loving Christian God out there that's supposed to be all loving, then he'll take that into account and I'm saved anyways.
Hallelujah.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. It's rational and reasonable to ask that.
I try to be.
And I hate saying that I have to go, but would you be willing? Would you be willing to have me on so that I might be able to try to answer?
You're great. Yeah, no, dude, I think you're amazing. I'm enjoying the conversation. I should look at Zod. He's smiling halfway ear to ear.
We'll bring everybody back for a round two to be continued. So since you have to go, let me let you guys close out real quick by dropping your channels again and letting everybody know where they can go and find more of you. In the meantime, before we get both of you back here, and then we'll close her out and you can get to where you're going, sir. We'll start with Zod. Go ahead and shill away.
All right. Yeah, I'm Prophet Azad. I have a YouTube channel by that name. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook. yeah, so go check it out if you're interested. I talk about atheism, talk about religion, silly little cartoons, stuff like that. So,
And he's hilarious.
thank you.
Very, very talented. If you guys have not seen Zod, you guys are seriously missing out because he puts so much effort into his productions. It's ridiculous. I mean,
Absolutely.
more
And
than probably
Jake-
any of us by far. James?
Radical. I'm stoked. First, thanks Zod for being willing to debate. I was like, I got to be honest, Zod. I was like, this guy's bringing some objections. Like this guy is like thinking through some tough stuff. So I really enjoyed that. I think that was the best strategy like that you could have picked. And I think it's a tough one for me to engage with because you're bringing up a lot of great stuff you did the whole time.
Thank you.
And then thanks for letting me come on NonSequitur. I'm at Modern Day Hysteria. And last thanks to the audience for bringing that up. If you can even send me the sources on why I'm out of line for putting infinites in the decision theory equation, I'm open to that. And it's something that I took more lightly than, I breezed past it without mentioning that there's a debate to be had there. So thank you guys. And it's been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How can you not like James? These are two fine gentlemen that we have on this show tonight. So
My favorite types of discussions.
we will bring
Yeah,
them
enjoy it.
back.
It's a lot of fun.
We will bring them back definitely, and we want to thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with the 3 black heathens and talk about their new show. So we'll see you tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Good night.
Non-sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated. Non-sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated. Non-sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
I don't think we could have paired a better